All right. Hello, everyone. This is a call to review some of the FIPs that I put together for the Enhanced Permission Initiative. Just looking for feedback. Those FIPs are out there in draft. So we're looking for feedback from everyone, whatever we're doing it right, should be doing it differently, or all good. Just a reminder of the FIP process. Typically, it's we put together the initial draft, which is kind of the stage we're at now, and then we kind of enter this community review period where we're asking everybody interested to just kind of review the FIPs and provide any feedback, comments, suggestions, enhancements, or whatever the case might be. And then it will actually be developed. It will just go to the development queue that the foundation is sponsoring. Once it's developed, then obviously Eric coordinates the deployment. So let's get right into it. So the overall initiative it's kind of it's a bucket for a lot of different things. It's called enhanced permissions, even though not everything is technically permission related, but it's kind of a broader initiative of things that we have collected from the community over the last several months in terms of, hey, this would be a good thing if the chain did. So we kind of grouped them together into this initiative. And then as I started to kind of look into each one of them, ended up creating a separate FIP for that. So I'm just going to go through each one of the FIPs at a high level. I'm not going to go through every single thing. But if you guys have questions, comments, or ideas for improvements, please stop me. So the first one here is actually not a FIP. It's just an initiative that we're tracking, which is we currently do not support custom permissions in the SDK itself. I think that's pretty straightforward. Anybody out there that's using the FIO SDK should be able to customize the permissions. Right now, they can't do that. They kind of have to go directly to the chain. So that's an initiative to just get it done. Not much to discuss there. The next one here is support alternate FIO key for encryption of new fund requests and record OBT. So that's currently as FIP 39. And let me just kind of give a brief overview of what is the problem that we're trying to solve here. So this is as you know, on the FIO chain, certain data that is actually put on chain is encrypted. And that pertains to primarily FIO request and record OBT. So those are kind of the two requests, the two actions that take this content blob, which is basically an encrypted blob, and puts it on the chain. And the idea is that only the sender and receiver of this information can actually read that data. That data is encrypted using shared Diffie-Hellman encryption scheme. And in order to do that, you need to typically have your own private key, and you need to have the public key of the other person that you're actually sending the data to. So then the question really becomes is, well, how do I know what is the public key of the other person that I'm just about to send a content to? And of course, it's all driven by FIO address. So somebody would go in and say, okay, I'm going to send something to Pavo at Edge, for example, and the client will then, currently how it works, it will go and fetch what is the FIO chain, FIO token public address. So it's using the same exact function that it would use when it's trying to get a public address for sending FIO tokens. So it's using the get pub address endpoint and saying chain code FIO, token code FIO, and it basically returns the public address, and then it's using that. And that's been working fine, except that we've been hearing that some people would like to have the flexibility to use a different key for encryption than a key to receive tokens, right? So somebody may say, hey, I have this a FIO public address, public key that's stored on my ledger hardware, for example, and I have it in my safe, and I'm not going to take it out to decrypt the message, but I still want to receive my tokens there. So they would like to have the ability to have that as a public address to where to send tokens, but then use a different key to actually decrypt the FIO request or or FIO or record OBT data. So the idea was, well, we'll just want to let customers, users have two separate keys. Kind of thought about how to do it. One obvious way to do it was to just basically say, well, let's just add a new quote unquote token code, right? And say, okay, FIO is used for sending tokens, and FIO encrypt, for example, is used as a public key for encryption. So that was actually a path that I initially went down and thought, well, that just makes total sense. It'd be very simple, no on-chain changes. But as I kind of dug a little bit deeper into it, I felt like it's one of the things we want to be able to support is we want to have, because it's kind of like a little bit of a backwards compatibility issue, that we want to have the ability to, once we shift to this new key, to basically return the old key for anybody who has not set the new key, right? So we would actually, as part of this specific approach, we're modifying the getter so that the getter is basically saying, hey, did this user set a unique public key? If yes, then return it. If no, just use the same one as for tokens, sending tokens. So because of that, I felt kind of uneasy to modify the get pub address getter, because it's such a critical getter in our function, and to have any kind of override logic in there, I felt like, it's not a good practice to do that. So as a result, I just am proposing in here that we introduce a new action, which is update encrypt key. And basically, you just pass in a FIO address and the encryption key, obviously fee and actor, and keep it the standard stuff. And then have another modification to a register FIO address. So obviously, we want to be setting this encrypt key anytime somebody is registering a FIO address and transferring FIO tokens. Those are the two actions that are currently creating accounts. We want to modify those actions to also insert this new encryption key, which would be the exact same key as is passed by to create the account. And then obviously, when we're burning the address, we want to make sure we burn that entry as well. And then we will just have a new getter, which is called get encrypt key, which will just pass in FIO address, and we just return that key that was set. If that key was not set, then it would just go and fetch the chain code FIO, token code FIO, just so to kind of keep the backwards compatibility. And because of the backwards compatibility issue, there's also a recommendation to actually basically first roll out the get encrypt key getter, so that it's basically fetching the information, advise everybody to start using this key, and only after like 90 days allow the update crypt key to actually allow the setting of a new key. So that there isn't a situation where if we roll all of this at the same time and one entity rolls out update crypt key and they set a new key, and then a getter is not yet updated, or the chain API is not yet updated to the latest getter, it's still returning the old key. So that's basically the change. It's pretty straightforward. I'm not prescribing where to store this data in the FIP. That's typically something that's done in the development phase. But to me, it makes total sense that would be a separate table that just has a FIO address to an encryption key mapping. And that table is just updated anytime somebody.
Well, I think it'd be fine if you added that level of information into the FIP. Like, as the product manager, as the product owner of this, that would be good information to have in the FIP. So,
well, but that's not, like I said, I don't, from my perspective, I don't really have a strong say in that. I would rather, and this is kind of the process we're following, is that once a developer starts working on it, they'll kind of come up with a with a design, and they will update the FIP in the implementation section and say, hey, here's how I'm actually going to do it. So we'll capture the data, but I don't like prescribe anything until the developer actually comes in and does the analysis and
not a prescribe. It's this is my idea and I designed this protocol. Hello. Like, come on, man.
Yeah, but I'm not the coder, so I'm not going
no,
to.
You're not, but you have good ideas, and I'd appreciate seeing them when I read a FIP. So that's all I got.
Okay.
I'm not going to argue with this anymore.
Any other comments on this FIP? All right. So let's get to the next one. Supporting sending of FIO tokens to an account. That's FIP 36. So the high level requirement here is that it might end up being a little difficult to send FIO to an account because obviously FIO has disabled the native EOS IO transfer action, which takes an account as a parameter because of all of the kind of making it the user the chain more user friendly, which I know is debatable, kind of what some of those choices were, but it was the idea was that the primary way of interacting with the chain would be using public keys, which then are hashed down to a FIO account name, and therefore that the transfer action was disabled. You can currently only send tokens to a public key. And then what happens on the back end, that public key is hashed down to an account name using a predetermined function, and the tokens are actually sent to that account. So they're not sent to a key that might be in permissions or anything like that. They're always sent to account, obviously. But that key is taken and hashed down. And that works fine most of the time, but if somebody starts setting custom permissions, what may happen is that key may not be easily identifiable, so that if you're trying to send to a particular account, let's say in the Block Explorer, and you're looking at the account and you're like, oh, I want to send funds to this account, I see the account name. You then have to figure out, well, but I don't know which key to use to send to that account. You can go into the permissions, but the permissions might have been changed, and that key might no longer be there. So now I would have to go to history and try to trace when was that key really inserted, or go and read the tables where we actually do have the mapping. So kind of thinking about that, I thought the easiest way to accomplish this is just to really add a new getter, which would be get account FIO public key, which would just basically take the account name, and it would look in the FIO address account map table, which is where we store the mapping, and just return the public key to you so you can then go and execute the actual send. So that should be pretty straightforward. Any questions on that? All right. And next one is support ability to create an account with custom permissions. Aaron, I think that's the one you brought us, and being able to basically create an account and set permissions in one call, which is obviously something that exists on the EOSIO chain using new account action. But new account action has been restricted to be a system action on the FIO chain, so you cannot do that on FIO chain. So now the only option you have is you can create an account by sending tokens to it, or by registering a FIO address or domain. And then what you would have to do is you would have to run update auth. But of course, you would have to use the private key of the owner active key that was used to create that account in order to make that call. And there are certain situations where that is not practical. So the objective here was to create an ability to create an account and actually set authorizations for that account to be exactly what you want all in one call. So the obvious choice here was to just say, hey, maybe we should just enable new account action to be a public call as opposed to a system action. That wasn't selected primarily because a new account is already used everywhere throughout a lot of contracts today, because obviously when you send tokens or if you register a few address or a domain, the system behind the scenes creates an account and it's obviously using that action. So it would kind of have to, it'd have to go and update this everywhere throughout all the contracts to make sure that it is working properly, because it would need to be updated. We would need to add a fee. We would need to potentially make it public key specific and all sorts of that. So I thought, and actually talked to Ed as well, that better approach would be to create a new action, which basically mirrors that. So create a new FIO account action, which takes FIO public key, which is going to be hashed down to an account name, and that's what's going to be used as the account name. But then, just like new account, it takes owner and active permissions. So you can set it to whatever you want, and that works exactly as update auth. So you can, configure it the same way as you would update auth. And of course, it will also require max fee, because that would likely be a call that is paid, since obviously it creates account and uses resources. So and then behind the scenes, obviously, is going to execute new account and pass all that information in. And that's it. Any questions on that? And Aaron, I'm specifically looking for you. I think you've reviewed those, but if you have any comments or questions on that, and does that really satisfy your objective?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have any questions, and I believe it does satisfy what we needed to do. I mean, our entire goal is just to be able to create an account and have the owner key not in use, so that way you can, in the future, use it for account recovery. And this will do that, and we can probably base the public key for FIO on, I don't know, maybe the owner key. I'm trying to, there's an option here, we're providing 3 keys from the looks of it.
Well, that FIO public key is only, so the way this works is that if you don't have to provide owner active, right? You can actually leave this
Right.
empty. Now, so if you don't, then obviously this key is going to be inserted for owner and active. But if you do provide owner and active keys, this key is really just going to be used to hash down to an account name, and that account name will be used. The key itself will actually not be inserted anywhere other than the mapping, right? That we just talked about. It will be inserted into the mapping, but other than that, it will not be part of the permissions at all. So you could use, a key that you're also going to be using in permissions, or you can just come up with a totally new key. That's fine.
Yeah. And that's basically the receiving key for when you're sending tokens to it.
Exactly.
And the others are the permissions.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I think that works.
Actually, one thing that I just thought for this FIP, as it relates to the other FIP, should that action also potentially take an encryption key, so that you could actually set the encryption key if you want it to be different as well?
That could be a potential nice add-on.
Right, because otherwise the only way to set the encryption key to something different would be to call it again, but you would now need the permissions and you'll be back into that same issue.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll probably add the encryption key, and then obviously it would probably have this FIP would be dependent on the other one. But I think that's a good thing to have. All right. That's that FIP. And the next one is lift limit on number of public keys allowed in custom permissions. So that's FIP 37. Just a quick recap on that. The issue here is that when we kind of made changes to to the model of how you set up an account and the fact that you're using a public key. Back then, the decision was made to restrict how many different unique public keys you can have in permissions. And that was done primarily to avoid confusion because of the fact that, hey, you know, I'm sending tokens to a key. And then if you insert multiple keys, you know, the thought process back then was that it might, you know, create some confusion. Honestly, I don't think that confusion factor really is that big, and obviously it does eliminate some of the functionality that EOSIO had that, you know, is probably still, it's probably beneficial. So what we're doing here is basically lifting the restriction that update auth currently has, which it says, hey, you can only have one key in the keys parameter. And that just gets removed, and now you can have multiple keys in the keys parameter, and that's basically it. And that's the other one, Aaron, that you're interested in, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think that's pretty straightforward. There's not much to it.
Yeah. And the fact that you can kind of set or retrieve what the receiving key is for sending tokens will go a long way to help mitigate whatever issues may have come from multiple keys existing.
Exactly.
Yep.
Mhm. All right, cool. And the last one is extend permissions to custom FIO actions. So that's FIP 40. So this was an interesting one. So the objective here, the kind of the request that we had primarily was, hey, if I have a FIO domain and that domain is set to private, the rule says, well, nobody can register a FIO address on a private domain. That's the whole point, except the owner of that domain. And that creates some issues for certain organizations that might have, you know, certain type of security setups where, you know, it's hard to now create those FIO addresses because you might have the ownership under an account that you, for whatever reason, don't want to be using as the account that's actually registering the FIO address. It's also actually creating issues for the foundation because the foundation has multiple accounts which are holding tokens with the explicit purpose of using those tokens to register FIO addresses early on. So we use that with partners right now. When a partner, let's say an exchange, says, okay, well, we want to register exchange domain, is going to be our domain, let's say Liquid. But we want to set it to private because we don't want other people to be registering FIO addresses on our domain. But the foundation is paying for registrations of first X addresses on that domain. And it actually creates problems because the foundation has tokens that can only be used on registrations, or they're in those restrictive accounts that cannot be transferred out of those accounts. But now, of course, that account doesn't have permission to register on a private domain. So we end up doing hoops like, okay, well, the domain owner has to transfer the domain to that particular bucket, and it just gets very, very messy. So the primary objective here was, okay, well, we need to have the ability for the domain owner to say, hey, I'm going to allow someone else to register FIO addresses on my domain, on my specific domain. So that's the primary objective. But as I was thinking about it, thinking, should this be done in a more generic way? Because perhaps, you know, that need would exist for something else. And how does that fit with the EOSIO core permissions, which already are, you know, covering a lot of different things? Unfortunately, they're not covering that one thing. And that is for two reasons. One is that it doesn't have the granularity to set a specific domain, right? So the EOSIO permissions has the option to say, okay, well, I'm going to give you reg address permission so you can register on my behalf. The problem with that is that that permission is going to be for all domains that are part of that I own. Not, I can't just say you have permission for this domain, but not for that. And the other, probably a bigger problem, is that the way EOSIO permissions work is they kind of let someone else be you, meaning that I can sign with my key, but it's really your account that's actually executing the action, and as a result, it's your account that's actually being charged a fee, right? So if I, like in our foundation example, I want to say, well, I want to let the foundation account to register FIO addresses on my private domain. If I was to do that through EOSIO permissions, I would still be the one paying, and I would like, you know, the person that's actually calling reg address to be paying that fee. So that's why EOSI permissions do not satisfy that particular use case. It's still kind of contemplated whatever we can quote unquote hack the EOSIO permissions to accomplish that goal. You know, there's this approach that I had here that I thought could work, but I think it's a little too hacky, if you will. And the other was kind of creating potentially a more broad permission scheme that kind of applies to other FIO specific things. That the problem with that approach is, as I looked at all the actions, I couldn't find another action where you know, that kind of custom permission would make sense and would not be satisfied by the EOSIO permissions. That's why ultimately the approach I'm recommending is that we just create a new action, which is basically saying add domain permissions, right? So it basically says, hey, this domain, I want to let this account and this account register on that domain, right? And that's basically it. So you get specify multiple accounts that can register on that particular domain, or you can obviously remove it. So this is the remove domain permission, which is the same way, only in reverse. You can remove the permissions, and then I think there's a remove all. Yeah, there's also a remove all domain permissions, which just basically removes all of them, which is very similar to what we did with the NFT mappings. There are basically 3 calls. It's add, remove, and remove all. So it's kind of mirroring that same approach. And then obviously we would need to modify the register FIO address action to go and inspect those permissions, right? So currently it just says, hey, is this domain private? And do you own it? No. Okay, then it's you know, you're not allowed, right? But this would make an extra effort and say, okay, it's a private domain, you don't own it, but let me see if you are in the permissions, so I can decide if you're allowed to register FIO address in that domain. Also modify burned expired, because we need to clear that entry. Same on transfer. And then create a new getter, which would just return those permissions for read purposes, so you know what they are. And that's it. Questions, comments on that? Ed, what do you think about that approach?
I'm gonna get unmuted. I think it's fine. I think it's good.
Okay.
Hey, Pablo, I
The
guess
problem I
didn't
have with your
pick
FIPS,
up-
Pablo,
sorry.
I just agree. So there you go.
Okay, good. Somebody else was saying something?
Sorry, I had a bit of a delay. So Pablo, you were saying I didn't totally pick up why you didn't want to just use generic. We can't just update to allow for a generic permission, like EOSIO like permission, and instead we want to kind of create our own custom actions for that. I guess I didn't totally follow that. What was that reasoning?
Well, there are 2 reasons. One is the way that the EOSIO permissions work is that they let you assume the account that you have permissions for. So let's take an example of, I have a domain, it's Pavo, and it's private, and you, Eric, want to register on Pavo domain, right? So I could actually today use custom permissions, right? I can create an entry and say, I'm going to give Eric reg address permissions on my account, which owns the Pavo domain.
Right.
And now Eric can call reg address. And obviously you would have to configure your call a little bit differently, but you can just, make that call, and you will be able to register a few addresses on my private domain. Two things though. One, you're not going to pay for that registration. I will, right? Because you're going to quote unquote impersonate my account, right? You're going to basically act as my account. So I'm going to be charged for it, which is not something I may want, right? I may say, hey, I'm okay with you, Eric, registering, but you got to pay, right? Which is actually the use case that the foundation uses, right? Because the foundation has the tokens, it wants to register and it wants to pay, but currently it cannot, right? So, so that's one problem. The other problem is that a reg address works on all domains, right? So I would have to give you a permission to register on any one of my domains, not just a particular one, which perhaps if that was the only problem, we would probably be fine with it and just say, hey, it's all or nothing. But the cost is probably the primary reason why it doesn't work.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Thanks, Pablo.
All right. Well, if no further questions, then thank you guys so much. If you do come up with any other comments or feedback, let me know. I'll keep it out in draft mode probably for another week or so, and kind of continue gathering feedback. And after that, we'll probably get it accepted and queue it up for development.
Looks great. Thank you for heads up.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Pablo.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.